Hi, Carter. We're going to pick up with chapter 16 of the Green Ember. This one's called Strangers in the Mist. Pickett rode on Uncle Wilfred's back, silently sulking all the way. He felt like a small child, like baby Jack's, a burden. His foot hurt, but Uncle Wilfred had wrapped it tightly, and that was some help. Heather and Smalls followed behind them. Whenever Uncle Wilfred turned in the path, Pickett caught glimpses of Heather. Sometimes she was looking up at him with worry. Other times, she and Smalls were talking. Smalls had his sword drawn some of the time, eyeing the woods carefully. Pickett couldn't really explain even to himself why he resented Smalls. Part of him was ashamed of the way he was acting, but he couldn't just stop. It felt so very right to be angry. And there was Smalls just asking for it. They went on and on, tired, hungry, and sore. The trees hung heavy and low. They were climbing. Pickett realized slowly and steadily upward. The air was moist, and the moss around the tree bottoms grew thick. A mist rose and hung all about the trees like a garish white cloak. They took many hidden paths through concealed hedges and up haunted hollows. Pickett closed his eyes. He must have dozed off. When he awoke, they were ascending a steep rocky hillside in the heavy mist. They slowed. Uncle Wilfred nodded to Smalls, who unrolled a cloak from his pack and draped himself in it. Uncle Wilfred, after lowering Pickett, did the same. "There it is," Uncle Wilfred said, stopping on a small stretch of flat ground partway up the mountain. "The savory den." Pickett saw a thick mist settling around a cave mouth overhung by gnarled ancient trees. A small stream ran beside the wide cave mouth, and water trickled over the entrance, splashing onto the stone below before sliding down into the stream. "Can we drink?" Heather asked. "Well, let's make sure it's safe," said Smalls, passing in front of Wilfred and drawing his sword once more. He pulled a hood up and over his head, folding his ears beneath it. He was hard to recognize, but by now Pickett could have spotted those movements from across a ridge. Pickett watched him closely. Smalls moved like a soldier who had done this 1,000 times. He seemed to be aware of everything. His arms were strong. Pickett knew, but he gripped his sword loosely, almost casually. He seemed almost at ease, but on the verge of springing into action. It was mesmerizing to Pickett, who had dreamed 1,000 times of moving just this way. Then he saw Heather watching Smalls with admiration, and the all too familiar resentment like a stomach ache gurgled up inside him again. Uncle Wilfred looked at Pickett. "Please don't move," he said. "Just wait here a minute." Uncle Wilfred drew his sword and passed beyond Heather to just behind Smalls. They crept silently, looking everywhere. Pickett didn't understand this, as there was nowhere to hide, either behind or in front of them. "Stand fast," they heard a voice cry out. In the heavy mist, Pickett couldn't see where it came from or who said it. "Take another step and it'll be a belly full of arrows for you." "I'm so hungry," Small said calmly. "I'd eat just about anything now." "Make a sudden move, little one," the voice said again, "and you'll have your wish." "Have you anything savory or Danish?" Uncle Wilfred asked. The wind picked up, blowing the mist away like a drawn curtain, and there beyond the cave, a tall brown rabbit stood on a rock. He had a bow, though it wasn't nooked with an arrow. Several rabbits stood behind him, arranged in staggered rows on each side like a V. "Is that Wilfred?" the stranger asked, an edge in his voice. "It is." "Is that Pacer?" "The same," the stranger said, bowing. He straightened and descended, his eyes on Uncle Wilfred with an occasional uneasy glance at Smalls. Pacer was a long, lean rabbit with weary eyes and a voice that was quiet but hard and cautious. "It's been a long time," Pacer said, crossing to Uncle Wilfred. Smalls drew even with Uncle Wilfred, his hand playing at his sword handle. They stood apart. Uncle Wilfred and Pacer and Pickett thought this was a very cold reunion. Pacer's small gang of rabbits, all dressed in green and all with arrows ready on their bowstrings, stood behind him. "We've come far and we're very hungry," said Uncle Wilfred. "We need to get inside." "No one enters unless Lord Ray gives the word," Peter said, nodding to a rabbit just behind him. The rabbit moved quickly into the cave. "How long has that been the law?" Smalls asked. Pickett noticed some irritation in his tone. He rather enjoyed it. Since our recent betrayal, said Pacer, it's hard to trust anyone regardless of their family connections. Got a tickle. They looked on in silence. Pickett was confused, but part of him reveled in the quiet anger simmering in Smalls. But Smalls stood still, looking cautiously around. It's an evil age when old friends aren't welcomed quickly, Uncle Wilfred said, but I understand your caution. They heard footsteps, and Pickett felt a surge of panic. This isn't how I imagined this happening. Out of the cave came a tall rabbit with gray and white fur. He was older than Uncle Wilfred, well dressed, wearing a gold chain around his neck with a bright pendant. His cape was gray, and his carriage was elegant. He wore a long sword with an elaborate silver hilt. His white tunic bore a simple crest, 2 diamonds side by side touching, the left one red and the right one green. He walked quickly to Wilfred, glancing at Smalls. Wilfred stepped forward, and Pickett caught his breath. The 2 rabbits embraced wordlessly, and Pickett thought he saw the beginning of tears in the lordly rabbit's eyes. He breathed again. I'm so glad to see you, the new rabbit said to Uncle Wilfred as Pacer bowed and stepped back. You are very welcome, friends. Thank you, Lord, said Uncle Wilfred. Lord Rake, may I introduce my niece and nephew, Heather and Pickett? I'm delighted to meet you both, Lord Rake said. All that I have is at your disposal. I see you're injured, Pickett. Pacer, please send someone for Emma, and get Gort as well while he's at it. Pacer nodded, and another of his lieutenants disappeared inside the cave. When Pacer turned, Pickett noticed that the twinned diamond crest, here set on a white field, was stitched on the shoulder of all the rabbits they were meeting. And this, Uncle Wilfred said, is Smalls. Smalls, he said, nodding, it's my pleasure to meet you. I'm sorry to cut short the introductions, Lord Rake, but is Tommy Decker here? Uncle Wilfred asked. The landing is destroyed and there are wolves down there. Lord Rake looked down. His smile vanished. Decker's gone. He sent a message to us, but he didn't make it. The wolves, he started, but he didn't finish. Heather gasped. Pickett winced. Uncle Wilfred's face fell. Smalls crossed to him and put a hand on his shoulder. The small crowd around the cave entrance, Pacer and his rabbits, newcomers and Lord Rake, bowed their heads. Pickett could see that Decker had been loved by all. Lord Rake looked up at last and took in the scene of bowed heads. He glanced at Smalls, then said in a strong, defiant voice, "It will not be so in the Mended Woods." Then the group, all but Pickett and Heather, each struck the air with a fist and called out in strong reply, "The Mended Wood."